Okay, we'll begin just making sure I have everything up to date with Git, and it looks fairly good. I've got the server running in one of my console windows. I've got the Rails console itself running in another. And so I'm going to start by adding a categories table, model, and view and controller sort of stuff, all by way of scaffolding, just to get it up and running quickly. So I'll do a Rails generate scaffold, where I am scaffold a category. And I'm going to keep my category table really simple. I'm just going to have it so that it has a primary key, a name, which is a string, and then the created, added, updated at columns. So because the ID and the timestamps are created by Rails, all I need to do is specify Rails generate scaffold category, name, colon, string. This will generate a bunch of files for me. One of them will be a migration file, so after I do this, I'll have to run my rakedb migrate command, and that will create my categories table in the database. So here we can see it's created all my views. If we scroll up a little bit, we can see that it created the categories controller, the category model, and then here's the migration that I need to run right now by running rakedb migrate. Once I've migrated the database, then I'm going to commit these changes to Git, and we'll proceed from there. Okay, so I'll do a git add git commit -m, added a scaffold for categories. Okay, so that means now I should be able to go to, for example, /categories, and I should be able to create new categories. Before I do so, it's probably good at this point to add some kind of menuing system so that I don't have to manually go up to here and go and type in /categories. And you'll see that my layout is sort of following me around. This is the layout that comes to us by way of the application layout file. If I go and open that up, I can make a very simple menu, just to simplify a few things to begin with. So I'll go to my application layout. Here you can see it includes that shared header that's being rendered. And so I'll go to that shared header partial. And maybe I'll do something like this, an ID of menu on a div. Not that I'm going to really be styling it much or at all. Link to, and let's put in 3 links. I have a homepage link, which will go to the root path. We'll have a products link, which will go to the products path, and we'll have a categories link, which will go to the categories path. To begin with, both the home and the product links are going to go to the same place. And that's just because that's how I have my routing file set up. I just happen to know the convention, so I know how to use the proper path here. But if you ever sort of get confused as to what you want to path to with a link to, remember you can always run rake routes. And this will inspect your routing file and give you the names of all the routes that exist in your system. And then when using link to, you just take the name that you want to route to and add _path to the end of it. And that's how you path to your various links. So when I run rake routes right now, I'll see all of my product paths, my category paths, and you can see when I want to get to the category index, this one right here, the name is categories. So I'm going to route to my categories path. When I want to get to the products index, it's products, so it'll be products path. And then when I want to get to my root, it's the root path. The root right now is going to the products index. I'm going to change that a little bit later so that we can have that front page, sort of like a nice user-facing home page that it'll eventually route to. But for now, very simple menu. This goes to home, this goes to /products, this goes to /categories. Good. Let's create a few new categories. I will create a category called food. I will create a category called machines. And I will create a category called paper. Very diverse store that I'm building right now. I sell machines, food, and paper. All on its own, this categories table is in no way related to my products yet. In order to do so, I need to set up an association, and before I can set up an association, I need a foreign key. The direction of the foreign key is going to be that a product is going to belong to a category, and a category will have many products. So it's on the products table where I want the foreign key to exist. If I look at my Rails guides for migrations, and I do a little search on references, if you think back to when I added my image column, I was able to generate a migration by naming it in a specific way, and it automatically built a migration for adding a column. There's also sort of a short form of doing this for adding foreign keys. So I'm going to say Rails generate migration, add, and in this case, the example is adding a user reference to products, but I want to add a category reference to products, and then I'll specify category references. And so what this is going to do for me, I'll type it out and then I'll explain. So if I say Rails, G for generate, migration, add category ref to products, category references. This is going to add a category underscore ID column to my products table, and it will automatically add a database index to it to sort of speed up database access to that particular column. I could have also done this in a sort of a more manual way. I could have done a Rails migration to add a category ID integer column to my database table, and then I could have added a separate index. But this does it all for me, all in one go. So this will create a new migration file in my db migrate folder, and once it's done that, we'll go and look at that migration file before actually running it. So this will be in the db migrate folder. There it is, add category ref to products, add reference, products, category, index true. That's going to add my category ID to products. Let's run this migration. Give it a moment in which to actually do this thing. There it is. If I now go to my Rails console and I reload my models with reload exclamation mark, I can now go and look at what it is to be a product. And I can see that a product now has a category ID, which is good. That's what I want. If I look at an individual product and I give it to, I assign it to a variable P, if I say product.first, well, that's our goat cheese, and I'll say C equals category.first. That is our food category. So I can now assign the category of food to goat cheese by using this p variable, which is my goat cheese, and saying p dot category equals, and then I have this variable c, which is my food. C. What? Oh, haha. What have I missed out? What have I forgotten to do?
Has many and belongs to.
You got it. Has many and belongs to. So I can't just put the foreign key in. I have to let Rails know about the association. So I have to go into my app models folder and open up both of these both of these models. And at the top of a product, I want to say that it belongs to a category, singular, because this is the side of the relationship that has the foreign key, so it can point to at most one category. And then on a category, I can say that it has many products, plural, because any number of products can point to an individual category. I may, while I'm in here, I might as well also add a validation. So I can say validates that the name of this category is present. So I can say presence true. Although the order in which you put these things doesn't matter, I tend to always put my associations at the top of my models, followed by my validations, just because when I come back to my code, it's sort of what I'm looking for. I read my model, I see my associations up top, and I see the validations below that. I should now be able to go back into my Rails console and reload, and then work through what I had been trying to do. So here's my my two variables. The p variable now holds my goat cheese. The c variable now holds my food category. So p dot category equals c. If I go back to p, we can see that the category ID has been set to 1, which is what we want. And I can say p dot save to persist that change. And now I can do things like, to make it a little bit more self-explanatory, instead of these really short variable names, I'll say food equals category dot first. And I can do things like food dot products dot count 1 dot first. There's my goat cheese. And I can go the other direction as well. Goat cheese is the first product. And if I want to see what the goat, not ghost cheese, but goat cheese dot category is, and it's my food category. I could even change directly to the name, food. So my associations appear to be working. I can set a category for a particular product, and I can chain two categories from a product, and I can chain two products from categories. So that's working. Now it might be nice to go and make a few modifications to how products are displayed. I have my product partial. Currently, when displaying a product, we see like the image and description, the name, the price, the stock quantity. Maybe below the stock quantity, I'll also put the category if it's available. So here's where in the product partial, I'm displaying the stock quantity. So, below that, I will put in paragraph tag, and I'll say category, colon, and then below that, I will display the products category name. Now I have to be careful because only one of my products currently has a category. And therefore, if I'm trying to use this partial on a product that doesn't have a category, category would be nil, and calling .name on nil will give me a exception. And so I'm going to first say, if the product category is present, then display that information. Otherwise, just leave it off. So I just sort of guard that paragraph with a decision based on the presence of the category. I can now go back to my store, reload, and you can see category of food is now being displayed for goat cheese, but for the rest of my products that don't yet have categories, they're not yet present. Good. Okay. We're not going to restrict our users to only being able to add categories by way of the console. That would be very limiting. We want to be able to add categories when creating new products or when editing existing products. And so we want to be able to modify the form partial to help us do this. A little bit of an aside on editing in Rails, you'll find that the number of tabs you have open, it just grows and grows and grows. I tend to sort of prune down my tabs every once in a while, so I've got this migration open, probably not going to work on that for a while. Probably don't need the layout or the header or even the models for a while. So just to keep things under control, I like to sort of prune my tabs. Okay, so we're going to be exposing the ability to set a category from a form. That means that we also have to edit the associated controller so that when we pull in the parameters from the outside world, we've described to Rails that it's permitted for the outside world to be able to change the category ID. So we change that here when we take the params and we permit certain usage of the params, and this product params is what's being used by both our update statement and our create statement. We could, and this would be fairly or pretty much the wrong way of doing things, but I'll do it the wrong way first. I'll create a label for the category ID, and then a nice little BR, and then I'll create a text field for the category ID. If I go back now to my store, let's say Coca-Cola, I'm going to edit that. Notice here I have a new area for category. I happen to know that food is primary key 1 in the database, so I could put a 1 in there. I could update my product, and now Coca-Cola has a category of food. If I go in and change that to 2, for example, it's now a category of machines. Go back and I'll put it back to food. Although it's debatable if Coca-Cola is actually food. So sort of does what we want, but really, again, we don't want our users to have to know some special information about the primary keys of our categories. Sure, they could find that out. They could go here and then they could go to one of these categories and they could look in the URL and they could see what the primary key was, but that would be a pretty unhelpful system. And so what would be really nice is in our form, instead of having a text area for the category, we would have a drop-down menu where you could pick categories from a list. And this is what Active Admin will do for you automatically. If it notices that you have an association and the thing that you're associated to has a property called name, it will build an automatic drop-down for you where it displays the name and assigns the foreign key for you. Okay, what that means though is that in both the new view and the edit view, we need to have access to a list of all of our categories. And so if I go to my controller, the products controller, I'm going to modify both the new and the edit such that they have access to a categories variable, which is all categories. like that. Now that I have inside of both the new and the edit access to a categories variable, I can use it inside of my form partial to actually build this dropdown. And just like we have form helpers for things like text fields and text areas, we also have form helpers for select dropdowns. So if you think back to your HTML knowledge, we have these things called select tags that you can fill up with option tags. And for every option inside of a select, that will be one of your options for the dropdown that gets displayed inside of your form. Rails builds these kind of things for us with collection selects. f.collection select. It's for the property category ID. The data itself is coming from the categories variable that I've just made accessible. And then again, if you think about how options work, so if we were manually building a collection select, we would have options, a certain number of them. And for each option, you might have some display content like food or machines. But you can also, for each option, have a value, which is what's actually submitted in the form when the option has been selected. And what we're going to want is something along these lines, where if the user selects food, what's going to be submitted is the primary key associated with food. And when the user selects machines, what we're going to want is the primary key associated with machines to be submitted. And so we're not building this ourselves. So what we have to do for the next two arguments for collection select is specify what property of the objects in this collection we should use for both the tag contents and the value contents. And I believe we specify the tag contents first and then the value contents. I might be getting this backwards. We'll go and look. So build a collection select for my category ID. Use the categories found in this variable, and then we'll see if I've properly ordered these two things. But these are both properties of a category object. So I'll go back here. I've done it opposite. So I've got numbers here. But if I reverse that then, so this becomes ID, and this becomes name. There we go. Food, machines, paper. If I view source here, we can see the generated select statement. Here it is. And you can see that for each one of my options, it has what we want. It has the sort of human readable name inside of the option and the actual primary key inside of the value. So now when I'm specifying, let's create a new product. It's going to be some homemade paper. Kyle made this paper at home out of dead trees and love. There's my paper, got one of them. Don't have an image for it right now, and I'll go to paper, and I'll say create. If we scroll down, there's my homemade paper. It has a category of paper, just like we want. If I edit it, it automatically selects the appropriate category in the dropdown as the default one, and I can change it if I want to. So not so hard. I mean, but it's a bit of work with figuring out to use the collection select and how it's actually used. And as I said, with Active Admin, this will be done for you. But it's nice to see that it's not very difficult to do this, were we to need to do this ourselves. Okay, it's probably time for me to go back to Git and do a little bit of an update here. So, products table with model associations. Also added a select drop-down for categories in the products form partial. Probably too much to commit at any one time, right? I had to do a lot of typing there, so that gives me a clue that I haven't committed often enough, you know, especially when it's multiple sentences, or if you write a whole paragraph, that's usually the bad idea. I noticed that the Git GUI tool tries to encourage you to keep your commit messages to 50 characters, and so this is more than 50 characters. Then push it up to GitHub. Okay, let's associate categories with these other things. So cow cheese can be food. Go back home. Shoe phone can be a machine. Coca-Cola's food, homemade paper is paper. Good. Okay, so on the product side of things, I've got the category being displayed. On the category side of things, it might be nice for the show pages of my categories to not only display the name of the category, but also to display which products are part of this category or belong to this category. So I'm going to go to my app views categories, and I'll pull out the show. And inside of the show, we see here, that's where it's displaying the category name. And so here I might do something like associated products. And then go to category.products.each, and from there I could say each product. No, I don't want you. I want each product to be called product, and I will wrap that in my ERB blocks. And let's just, oops. For each product, I will say link to the product name for the link text and the product for the path. Let's check to see if this is going to work. Oh, and that's just me in my naming conventions. If you think back to how I originally had named products, I gave them titles instead of names, which is I probably shouldn't have done that. I probably should have called it name. We could solve this in two ways. One, we could solve this by just changing it to title. But there are some things like, for example, active admin, which is often sort of looking for a name property for certain purposes. I can create an alias from name to title if I need that. And I can do that inside of the model as just a plain old Ruby method. So I could do something like define name and just have it return self.title. That's a nice little alias. So whenever I do product object.name now, it's just going to return the product object's title. And so that, would happen here. If I run this, I've now got links to my various products. If I go back to categories, show machines, I've got my machine. I go to paper, got my paper, clicking on any one of them brings me to the actual product. Although I can do that, I just wanted to show you that you could do that. I'm not actually going to leave that in. So I will reference it as title. Okay, back over to Git. associated products.
What was it coding in?
For
Showing the product?
oh,
Or product.
for showing all the products. So inside of my show page for categories, where I have a single category variable that's been made accessible to me by way of the controller, I can use the association by saying category.products and then looping through each product and linking to using the product title for the link text and the product itself for the path. And remember, this is a short form. The long form would be link to the product path, passing in this current product object. But because that's done so often and just sort of for convention purposes, Rails understands that this is the same thing. So again, let's just make sure that's working. Show food. There's my different products.
That works because you're going from the category page to the categories that are, the products that are associated with the category.
You got it. So if we think about what's happening at sort of a controller level, we've got the categories controller, the show, it looks empty here. This is what scaffolding does. Scaffolding these days does what's called a before action, where it says on the actions show, edit, update, and destroy, we want to set the category. And that's actually just a private method down below, which does this, finds the category based on the parameter ID. That's a way of drying up our code. If you look at my products controller, you'd see that the show has the same line of code as the edit, has the same line of code as the update, and has the same line of code as the destroy. And so that's been dried up in the scaffold generated code. The show is empty, the edit is empty. They're all running this method, set category, before they're invoked, which is just calling that repetitive line. But yeah, so what's happening in the show is we have access to this category variable, and then inside of the show view, we're looping through the products associated of the category and building links to each one of them. And those will be links within the products controller. So we're linking from the categories controller to the products controller here. Okay, that's pretty good. I've got my association set up and everything seems to be working. I'm still sort of working in this kind of back-end world. It might be nice to have a front end to my store, and it might even be good at the front end of the store. I might be able to reuse the same partial, but it would be nice to get rid of these things, right? We don't want even our users to see the words edit or delete, and we'd also want to add password protection in some way to the products controller and the categories controller, and leave my store controller to be publicly accessible. So let's begin on that. Let's start by creating a new controller. So I'll do a Rails generate controller, and I'll just call it store, and I'll give it a single action and view called index. So this will create for me a new store controller in my controllers folder. It'll create within that controller a single method for the action index, and within the store views folder, it'll create my index.html.erb. So I can open up that view. Here's the index view. I can open up the controller. There it is here. And I'm also going to open up my routing file, remove the default route that it added for me, and now I'm going to make it so that the root route doesn't go to the products controller index, it goes to the store. So now when I go to home, this is the store. That's sort of the default text that's found inside of my index.html.erb. Products still takes me to the products. Categories still takes me to the categories. Home now takes me to this new place. So I'm not going to do anything too fancy in this front end for my store. I'm just going to make it so that on this home page, I can display within sections the products that are belonging to different categories. So maybe I will have an H3 for displaying each of the category names, and below that header, the products that are associated with that particular category. So again, I think I'll probably simplify some of this by closing down some of my other tabs here for now. So in the store controllers index action, I'm going to go and grab my categories, and I'll just grab them all. Maybe I want to order them. Maybe I want to order them by name. Okay, that'll give me all my categories ordered by name. And then in the index here, I'm going to say categories.each, remove this generated code, do category, and then I'll wrap this here. And initially I'll just say, okay, for each category, drop in an H3 and display the category name. So looping through that variable I made accessible, grabbing objects, calling them category, outputting the category name inside of a header. That's looking good. Maybe H2s are a little better. Good. And now with underneath each one of these, I'd like to display my actual products. Remember, I have a partial for displaying these products. And so I'm going to say render the category.products. And this is a nice little short form, and because I've used naming conventions, it's going to work for me. When I need to do something a little bit more complex in a few more minutes, I'm not going to be able to have such a nice short form on my render statement. But inside of my products folder, I have a partial called product. By saying render category products, Rails is going to automatically look in my products folder for a product partial, and it will try to run and render that partial once for each product in that collection of products. So this is the collection of products that belong to this particular category, the category that we're currently sort of looping through from the categories collection. Back to the display. There it is. So under food, we see goat cheese and cow cheese and Coca-Cola. Under machines, we see the shoe phone, and under paper, we see the paper. So it's done what I wanted. It's displayed things in a nice categorized way. But it's still displaying these edit and delete links. And so I want a way in which I can hide those links if required. So from my products partial, there are these links here. I'd like it if I could do something like this. You know, if I want to show the admin links, then show them. Otherwise, don't. But how do I do that? How do I make this flag here, show admin links, available to me from the outside of the partial? Well, that's where the locals option comes in handy. But I'm no longer going to rely on this shortened form for dealing with my render. I'm going to have to be explicit about the render statement now. So I'm going to have to say render, put that on another line, render the partial partial found in the products folder called product. So I'm telling Rails where to find this path-wise. Then I'm going to tell Rails that I want it rendered once for every element in this particular collection. So render this partial for this collection, and then make available to me within this collection some local variables, one of which is going to be called show admin links. And this is the user version of the store, so that'll be false. And so that's almost like we're passing in an argument into my partial. Anything that's inside of that local hash as a key ends up being a variable that's available inside of my partial. And so now inside of my partial, I will have a show admin links, which is false. And if show admin links is false, then those admin links aren't going to show. So let's see if I did that right. Good, went away. If I go back to my backend though, I get an error because that show admin links doesn't exist. And so now I have to make it available inside of my other statements that render the same partial. Those are the product's index and the product show. The product's show renders a single product like this. I have to make the local variable accessible here as well. So I'm going to say render the partial, and it's in the same folder as me, so I don't need a path to it. Product. This is a show page, so it's a single object. So the object in question is this product object. And now I have my locals that I want to make available, which is show admin links. And in this case, it's true. And for the index, it's going to be very similar. I have to replace my nice and concise render products with render the product partial, this time for the collection found in the products variable. And again, show admin links should be true. So now if I go back here, the admin links are visible. Go to categories. Oh no, go to the show page. The admin links are visible, but from the home page, they're not. Okay, I might also make this link go away. I'm in the front end of the store, but this link links to the show in the back end, right? So I might make that go away as well. So if I go to my product, that's this link here. I might say again, if show admin links is true, I'll display that as a link. In this case, I'll have an else and an end. And the else will be that instead of doing a link to, I'll just display the product title. Back to products, that's still working, but on home, now it's just a regular header, not a link. We could even make this more complicated. We could make it so that in the front end, it actually linked to a show which was part of my store controller and displayed it in a separate way for the user. But I'm going to say that we've done sort of enough so far on this sort of theme. So I think we can feel confident that we can check this into Git. Okay, got a bunch of stuff going on here. Git add, git commit, -m, added a store controller, and modified the product partial for admin/non-admin The last thing I want to show today is adding a simple way to protect the products and the categories from our regular users. We don't want them to be able to go in to those sections. We want those to be password protected with a username and a password. Let's quickly look back to the scaffolded categories controller. Again, looking at what was happening here with this before action. This says before action and then the symbol set category, and then it says only show, edit, update, and destroy. And as I mentioned before, what this means is before the actions listed in this list here, run a method called set category, which is down here. We can use the same kind of thing for username and passwords. We can have a method that forces the user to enter in a username and password, and we could have it run before all of the actions. The thing is we need it for both the categories controller and for the products controller. So I don't want to re-implement it in two places, but notice that all of our controllers, the categories controller, the store controller, and the products controller, they all inherit from something called application controller. An application controller is in my application, or it's in my controllers folder called application controller. And it inherits from action controller base, is where most of our controller stuff from Rails is coming from. Anything we put in here though is going to be inherited by all controllers. So I could put my password checking code in here, and then I can only sort of set a before action on it for both the categories and the products controller, but not the store controller. Okay. I have to go and grab it from what I did earlier today because I can't remember. It's got a really, really long method name for asking for a password. Here it is. So in my application controller, I'm going to create a section for protected methods. And inside of there, I'm going to create a method called require sudo, as in require super user access. And in there, I'm going to call a method, which is a very long method, which is authenticate or request with HTTP basic, which takes a block, which is going to give us a username and password, which is going to come from the end user. And then here, this is just a Boolean expression, which will either evaluate to true or false based on these hard-coded usernames and passwords. And I have a little comment here that says, yes, I know I've got a hard-coded password in my source, which is visible on GitHub. So this is like a bit of a no-no, right? If you're going to hard-code a username and password into your source code and then put it up publicly on GitHub, bad news, right? So yes, I know I'm doing something wrong here, but it's for demonstration purposes. Typically, if you were to do this, what you might do is you might have the username and password stored in another file, and you might have that file not be part of your GitHub repository. You might add it to your gitignore file so that it wouldn't be part of it. Or going further, you might have this block of code actually go to the database and look for a username and password that's in the database. And then you might even go further and do things like salting and hashing the password in the database, more security kind of stuff that we won't get into here. For us, we're going to be okay with putting in a hard-coded username of admin and a hard-coded password of secure password. Just putting this in here alone doesn't do anything. What I have to do is I have to go to both my categories controller and my products controller and use that before action filter to run this. And one of the neat things about before action is if the method that you're calling by way of before action returns false to you, then it won't even try to run the action that it is running before. And so that's why this is just a Boolean expression. If this evaluates to true, then the action it's running before is going to continue and execute. If this returns false, then the action that it's running before is not going to be allowed to execute. So I can add this to my categories controller. I can say before action require sudo, just the name of my method. And if I don't specify an only, well, then it's going to run before all of my actions. We also have the ability to say except, where we can sort of specify, you know, run it on all maybe except for show. But I'm just going to have it run on all. So it's like my entire categories controller, I need a password. If I also go to my products controller, I can do the same thing. I can go up to the top. I can say before action require sudo. And again, that's just going to run this before the action. And if the username and password provided by the user matches, it'll return true and it'll allow my action to continue. The way it prompts the user for a username and password is it just uses the browser's username and password prompt. So, Damien, you've seen this in PHP. It's the same thing we do for that sort of basic HTTP authentication. So we can go and check this out. If I go to home, I should be fine. If I go to products, let's see why this isn't working. Require sudo with an admin. I wonder if it's because my browser is caching the password from this morning. Admin user. Okay, so it's because I had logged in earlier with the other section. So now I opened up an incognito window which won't know about a previous authentication in the day. So going to home, things are working. I don't need to use a name and password, but if I choose either products or categories, it just pops up a browser prompt. So I don't even have to create a view into which I put a form and ask for the username and password. HTTP itself has something called HTTP basic authentication, which just asks your browser to do this kind of prompt for it. If I cancel out, it just says denied. I can't get to it. If I put in an incorrect username and password, can't get to it. If I put in the correct one, admin user and secure password, I'm in. And now I'm in. I don't need to ask for this anymore. It's good, and that's why having logged in earlier today with the other group, Chrome here had remembered that I'd logged in, and that's why it hadn't asked me. So I had to sort of go into this incognito window, which was sort of in blank slate. And so that's the easiest way to add a username and password. Not going to be super flexible for a system that requires a lot of users, nor does it allow you to do things like sign up new users and set passwords, etc. For that, you probably want to use a built-in gem anyways. If you look at what ActiveAdmin's doing, it's using the devise gem, which is a very popular gem for authentication. And when you're using a gem for authentication, you can feel a little more comfortable knowing that they're likely doing all of the sort of back-end security stuff well. Like they're probably not saving the password in plain text to a database. I would recommend if you are using a authentication gem, you probably want to audit it in some way just to see what they are doing security-wise, because it can be embarrassing to do security things incorrectly. I remember in the early days of Reddit, I got an email from the Reddit administrators saying, our database got stolen, all the passwords for all of our users were in it, they were all in plain text. Please change your password immediately. It's embarrassing, but it happens. A number of websites that I've had up on the internet have been hacked for various reasons. So, you know, if you sort of think of it as a when, not if proposition, you know, when you're going to be hacked, you probably want to be somewhat prepared in doing things like not having passwords in plain text in your database. And probably also not having username and passwords hard-coded into your software. That said, I'm going to update Git here. Git add, git commit, added a user pass prompt for the admin controllers using HTTP basic auth. User pass is currently hard-coded into the source. Yes. Yes, it is. And I think that's all I'm going to do today. So we've seen the addition of a new table by way of the categories table. We added a foreign key to the products table using a reference migration. We then set up the associations between products and categories in the correct models. We played around a little bit with both the products and the categories view to do things like displaying the category names for products or displaying the associated products for categories. We then went and created a whole new controller and set it as the root of our application, and we had it load up all categories and in the view loop through the categories and display the associated products. And then we made a little change to the product partial so that on the front end the admin links, like the edit and delete links, would not be visible, although they would still be visible on the back end. And finally, we added a password to both the products and categories controller, leaving the home index untouched in terms of authentication. Does anyone have any questions about anything I did today? Right on. So I'll stop the screencast and then I'll ask if you have any other questions about sort of Rails in general.